At 72, I thought I knew my daughter better than anyone in the world. I was catastrophically wrong. My name is Dorothy Harrison, and I built Harrison's Corner Cafes from a single coffee cart outside Powell's Books into Portland's most beloved chain of neighborhood gathering places. 7 locations, 43 years of 18-hour days, and a small fortune that represents everything I sacrificed after my husband died when Jennifer was 8 years old. I did it all for her. The daughter who became a polished MBA, the successful marketing executive who made me prouder than any business achievement ever could. When Jennifer called that rainy October evening requesting a family meeting, I expected routine estate planning discussions. She arrived at my Craftsman home in Hawthorne with 10-year-old Tommy and a leather briefcase full of what she called inventory papers, documents that needed my signature to streamline assets and optimize tax implications, while I was still, in her carefully chosen words, mentally sharp. The legal language might as well have been hieroglyphics, but Jennifer explained everything with the patient authority I'd grown to admire in her professional life. Transfer agreements, management structures, corporate frameworks, all designed to protect my legacy and ensure my golden years would be worry-free. She spread the contracts across my dining room table like a chess master positioning pieces for checkmate. But then Tommy, my precious grandson with his father's gentle eyes and my stubborn streak, tugged at my sleeve. His whisper sent ice through my veins. "Grandma, she's going to take everything from you and leave you with just an old house." In that moment, watching my daughter's practiced smile falter for just a heartbeat, I realized the terrible truth. These weren't estate planning documents. They were elegant theft, wrapped in legalese and family concern. Jennifer, the child I'd raised to be strong and independent, was systematically dismantling my life's work while I sat there with a cup of coffee, trusting her completely. The betrayal cut deeper because I recognized the signs I'd once worn myself. The forced composure hiding financial panic. The designer clothes masking desperation. The way she wouldn't meet my eyes when discussing specifics. My successful daughter was drowning, and instead of asking for the life preserver I would have thrown without hesitation, she'd chosen to pull me under with her. As the rain intensified outside, turning Portland's October leaves into a slick carpet of destruction, I faced an impossible choice. The papers before me would strip away Harrison's Corner Cafes, leaving me with this aging house and whatever dignity I could salvage. But signing them might save the daughter who had apparently been stealing from me for months. Small amounts at first, she would later confess through tears, then larger sums as her world collapsed around her. The irony was crushing. I had spent decades teaching Jennifer that women could build empires from nothing, that strength meant never showing weakness, that asking for help was admission of failure. Now those lessons had twisted into something monstrous, creating a daughter so afraid of disappointing me that she'd rather destroy us both than admit she was struggling. The contracts lay between us like a battlefield, her desperate attempt at salvation through deception, my life's work reduced to legal footnotes. Tommy watched from the kitchen counter, doing homework while carrying the weight of family secrets no 10-year-old should bear. And somewhere in the space between Jennifer's practiced explanations and my growing horror, I realized this wasn't just about money or property or even trust. This was about 2 women who had loved each other imperfectly for 51 years, who had built walls instead of bridges, who had mistaken silence for strength until the silence became a chasm that nearly swallowed everything worth saving. Jennifer needed me to sign those papers to avoid prison. I needed to understand how the little girl who once helped me count coffee cart receipts had become a woman capable of such elaborate betrayal. And Tommy needed us both to find a way through this maze of desperation and pride before it destroyed what remained of our family. The rain hammered against my windows with increasing fury, as if the sky itself was weeping for choices that couldn't be undone. In my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd taught Jennifer to make cinnamon rolls and celebrated her MBA graduation, my daughter waited with a pen in her manicured hand and 43 years of my dreams spread across mahogany wood. What happened next would determine whether love could survive the weight of secrets, whether forgiveness was possible when trust lay shattered like coffee cups on concrete, and whether a family built on good intentions could find solid ground after the foundation had cracked beyond recognition. Some storms pass quickly, leaving minimal damage. Others strip away everything you thought you knew about the people you love most, forcing you to rebuild from whatever pieces remain scattered in the aftermath. I was about to discover which kind of storm had found its way to my dining room table on that dark October night when the rain wouldn't stop, and my daughter's smile couldn't hide the desperation in her eyes. The pen felt impossibly heavy in my hand as I reached for the first contract, knowing that whatever choice I made would change everything, for better or for worse, forever. The rain had been falling on Portland for 3 days straight, turning the October leaves into a slick carpet of amber and rust that clung to my front steps like desperate prayers. I stood at my kitchen window, watching water cascade down the glass in rivulets that reminded me of tears I hadn't yet shed, nursing my third cup of coffee since dawn. At 72, I'd learned that some mornings require more caffeine than others, and this Thursday felt like it might drain my entire pot. My hands, weathered from decades of handling coffee equipment, scarred from 1,000 small burns that come with the territory, trembled slightly as I lifted the mug. Not from age, though my doctor would disagree, but from something deeper. An unease that had been building for weeks, like the atmospheric pressure before a storm that animals sense but humans ignore until it's too late. The call had come 3 hours earlier, Jennifer's voice crisp and professional even at 7 a.m. "Mom, we need to have that family meeting we discussed. Tonight, if possible. I've prepared some documents we should review together." Her tone carried that particular blend of authority and patience she'd perfected in her marketing career, the voice she used when managing difficult clients or, apparently, difficult mothers. I'd agreed, of course. How could I not? Jennifer was my only child, the center of my universe even now, even when our conversations felt more like board meetings than mother-daughter chats. Since her divorce 3 years ago, she'd thrown herself into helping manage my business affairs with the intensity of someone trying to outrun their own shadows. "You're getting older, Mom," she'd said then. "You need someone you trust watching over things." Trust. The word echoed in my mind as I watched a neighbor's cat pick its way delicately across the wet street, each step calculated and careful. Trust was what I'd built my entire empire on. Trusting that people would want good coffee and warm conversation, trusting that my customers would return, trusting that hard work would eventually pay off. Trust was also what I'd given Jennifer when I signed those papers, making her my business advisor, my co-signer on accounts, my designated decision maker if anything happened to my mental faculties. The house around me held 43 years of memories, each room a chapter in the story I'd written as a widow, raising a daughter alone. This craftsman-style home in the Hawthorne district had cost me everything I had in 1981, a leap of faith that Richard would have called pure madness. But it was ours, mine and Jennifer's, bought with life insurance money, and supplemented by wages from my job at the downtown Marriott where I cleaned rooms and dreamed of something bigger. The dining room where Jennifer would spread her documents tonight still bore scratches in the hardwood from when she'd done homework here as a child, pressing too hard with her pencils, always trying so earnestly to be perfect. The built-in cabinets displayed photos spanning decades. Jennifer in her high school graduation cap, Jennifer holding Tommy as a red-faced newborn, Jennifer shaking hands with the dean at Portland State when she received her MBA. Every image showed that same determined smile, the one that said she could handle anything life threw at her. But lately, that smile had begun to look more like armor. I walked through the living room, running my fingers along the mantel where Jennifer's school awards stood alongside pictures of my 7 Harrison's Corner cafes. Each cafe had its own personality. The original location on Burnside, with its exposed brick and vintage espresso machine, the cozy Selwood spot with mismatched chairs I'd found at estate sales, the newest location in the Pearl District with its modern fixtures and hipster clientele. They were my children, each one born from 18-hour days and the bone-deep certainty that Portland needed gathering places where neighbors could become friends over locally roasted coffee. The phone rang, interrupting my reverie. Tommy's voice burst through the receiver like sunshine through clouds. "Grandma Dot, Mom says we're coming over tonight for boring grown-up stuff, but can we make cinnamon rolls after? The ones with the cream cheese frosting that makes Dad jealous even though he lives in Seattle now?" I laughed, despite my unease. "Of course, sweetheart. We'll make a double batch. One for tonight and one for you to take to school tomorrow. Mom says you've been forgetting stuff lately. Is that true?" His 10-year-old directness could cut through pretense like a hot knife through butter. "Because if you start forgetting how to make cinnamon rolls, I'll be really sad." My chest tightened. "I'm not forgetting the important things, Tommy. Just little stuff. Like where I put my reading glasses or whether I turned off the coffee maker at the shop. Everyone does that sometimes. Mom does that too, but she gets really upset about it. Like, really upset. Last week she couldn't find her car keys and she started crying, which was weird because they were in her purse the whole time. I filed this information away, adding it to the growing collection of details that painted a picture I wasn't sure I wanted to see. Jennifer had always been high-strung, a perfectionist who inherited my work ethic, but not my ability to roll with life's punches. Lately, though, she'd been more brittle, quicker to anger, slower to laugh. I'd attributed it to the stress of single motherhood and a demanding career. But what if there was more? After hanging up, I spent the afternoon at my original cafe on Burnside, the one that started it all. The lunch rush had ended, leaving just a few regulars nursing their drinks and tapping away at laptops. Maria, my assistant manager, approached with the daily reports I'd requested. "Everything looks good, Dot," she said in her musical Guatemalan accent. "Sales are up 15% from last month, and the new Ethiopian blend is really popular. Oh, and Jennifer stopped by earlier to pick up some papers from your office." My stomach lurched. "What papers?" "I don't know. She said you'd asked her to grab some financial documents. She had her key, so I figured it was fine." Maria's expression grew concerned. Was it not okay? She seemed tense, more than usual. I forced a smile. "I'm sure it's fine. Just some bookkeeping stuff we need to review." But it wasn't fine. Jennifer hadn't mentioned picking up documents, and I couldn't think of any financial papers I'd asked her to retrieve. My office at the cafe held copies of everything: tax returns, profit and loss statements, vendor contracts, employee records. The fact that she'd taken something without telling me felt like a small betrayal, a crack in the foundation of trust we'd built. The rain had intensified by the time I drove home, turning the streets into mirrors that reflected the neon signs of food carts and boutique shops. Portland wore October like a comfortable sweater, damp and gray but somehow inviting, full of the promise that spring would return eventually. I'd always loved this city, loved how it embraced both the practical and the quirky, how it made space for dreamers and entrepreneurs and people who believed that good coffee could change the world. As I turned onto my street, I saw Jennifer's silver Lexus already parked in my driveway. Through the windshield, I could make out two figures: Jennifer hunched over the steering wheel, talking rapidly on her phone, and Tommy in the back seat reading a book. Even from a distance, I could sense the tension in Jennifer's posture, the way her free hand gestured sharply as she spoke. I parked behind her and waited, watching my daughter through 2 layers of rain-streaked glass. Her honey blonde hair was pulled back in the severe chignon she'd worn to every business meeting I'd ever seen her attend. Her charcoal suit was perfectly pressed, her makeup flawless despite the weather. She looked every inch the successful professional, but something about the set of her shoulders reminded me of the 8-year-old girl who used to hide under her bed when thunderstorms rolled through. Tommy climbed out first when they finally emerged from the car, racing toward me with his backpack bouncing and his gap-toothed grin lighting up the gray afternoon. "Grandma! I brought my math homework in case this takes forever." Mom said it might take forever because grown-ups like to talk about boring stuff for a really long time. Jennifer followed more slowly, a leather briefcase in one hand and an umbrella in the other. "Hi, Mom. Thanks for making time for this on short notice. I know you're busy." There was something in her voice, a formality that hadn't been there before, as if we were business associates rather than mother and daughter. She kissed my cheek, but it felt perfunctory, a gesture performed rather than felt. "You're never an inconvenience, sweetheart," I said, ushering them both toward the front door. "You know that." Inside, Tommy immediately claimed his usual spot at the kitchen counter, spreading his homework across the surface while I started a pot of coffee. Jennifer remained in the foyer, checking her phone with the distracted intensity of someone expecting bad news. "Everything okay at work?" I asked, pulling down 3 mugs from the cabinet. "Work's fine," she replied without looking up. "Just the usual client demands and deadline pressures. Nothing I can't handle." But her hands were shaking slightly as she typed, and I noticed she'd bitten her nails down to the quick, a habit she'd abandoned in high school when she decided it wasn't professional. The small details were adding up, creating a picture that made my maternal instincts hum with worry. Tommy looked up from his math worksheet. "Mom's been staying up really late lately working on stuff. Sometimes I hear her on phone calls when I'm supposed to be sleeping." "Tommy," Jennifer said sharply, "focus on your homework." "I am focusing. I can focus and talk at the same time. It's called multitasking. You taught me that word." Despite my growing unease, I couldn't help smiling. Tommy had inherited the Harrison stubborn streak along with my late husband's gentle nature, a combination that made him both endearing and impossible to intimidate. Jennifer set her briefcase on the dining room table with more force than necessary. "Shall we get started? I know you like to have dinner early, and this might take a while to go through everything properly." The way she said everything made my skin prickle. I poured coffee into 3 mugs, adding cream to mine and Tommy's, leaving Jennifer's black the way she'd preferred since college. When I brought the drinks to the dining room, Jennifer was already laying out documents in neat stacks, her movements precise and methodical. "I've been working with an estate planning attorney," she began, her voice taking on that professional tone again. "Mom, I know this isn't easy to think about, but we need to be proactive about protecting your assets and ensuring everything transfers smoothly when the time comes." "When what time comes?" I asked, settling into my usual chair at the head of the table. "When you're not able to manage things anymore." She said it gently, but the words hit like physical blows. "You've been having more memory issues lately. You said so yourself. And the business has become so complex, with 7 locations and dozens of employees. It's a lot for anyone to handle, especially someone in their 70s. I wanted to argue, to point out that I still remembered every employee's name, every vendor's payment terms, every customer's favorite order. But the truth was, I had been forgetting things. Small things, mostly, but enough to make me question whether Jennifer was right to be concerned. "What kind of documents are these?" I asked, reaching for the nearest stack. Jennifer's hand intercepted mine. "Let me explain each one first, so you understand what we're accomplishing. This first set deals with inventory management, cataloging all your business assets, real estate holdings, equipment, intellectual property like the Harrison's Corner name, and recipes." She spoke for 20 minutes, her words flowing with the practiced ease of someone who'd rehearsed this presentation. She talked about tax implications and liquidity concerns, about the importance of clear documentation and proper legal structures. But as she spoke, my attention drifted to Tommy, who had abandoned his homework and was watching his mother with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of confusion and something that looked almost like fear. "Are you listening, Mom?" Jennifer's voice snapped me back to attention. "Of course, sweetheart. I just want to make sure I understand everything before I sign anything." "That's exactly why I've prepared these summaries," she said, sliding a folder toward me. "Everything's explained in plain English, not legal jargon. And my attorney has reviewed everything to make sure it's in your best interests." But as I looked at the papers, the words seemed to swim on the page, not because of my age or any memory issues, but because something felt fundamentally wrong about this entire situation. Jennifer was talking about protecting my assets, but she hadn't asked about my wishes or my vision for the future of Harrison's Corner cafes. She was discussing my business like it was already hers to manage. "Jennifer," I said carefully, "what exactly happens to the cafes under this arrangement?" "They'll be preserved and professionally managed," she said quickly. "You won't have to worry about day-to-day operations or financial decisions. Everything will be handled by qualified professionals." "Qualified professionals like you? Like the management company I've identified?" "They specialize in food service operations and have an excellent track record." My blood chilled. "A management company? Not family?" "Mom, you've always said business and family don't mix well. Remember when you refused to let me work at the cafes during high school because you wanted me to focus on my education? You said I needed to build my own career, not rely on yours." She was right. I had said that. But I'd also assumed that someday when she was ready, when she'd proven herself in the world beyond my shadow, she might choose to be part of what I'd built. The idea that she would hand over my life's work to strangers felt like a betrayal of everything we'd shared. Tommy suddenly appeared at my elbow, having climbed down from his stool without either of us noticing. He tugged on my sweater, his small hand insistent. "Grandma," he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. "She's going to take everything from you and leave you with just an old house." The world tilted. Jennifer was still talking, her voice becoming background noise as Tommy's words echoed in my mind. "Take everything. Leave you with just an old house." How did a 10-year-old understand what I was only beginning to grasp? "Tommy, go back to your homework," Jennifer said without looking up from the papers. "But Mom..." "Now Tommy." He squeezed my hand once before returning to the kitchen, leaving me alone with my daughter and the growing realization that I was being methodically, professionally dismantled. The papers spread across my dining room table weren't inventory documents or estate planning tools. They were transfer agreements designed to strip away everything I'd spent 4 decades building. I looked at Jennifer, really looked at her, and saw myself at 40, desperate, proud, and willing to do whatever it took to survive. The recognition was terrifying and heartbreaking in equal measure. My daughter wasn't just trying to steal from me, she was drowning, and instead of asking for help, she'd decided to pull me under with her. "Jennifer," I said quietly, "tell me what's really going on." For a moment, her professional mask slipped, and I saw the frightened little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Then she straightened her shoulders, picked up her pen, and pointed to the first signature line. What's really going on is that I'm trying to take care of you the way you took care of me. These documents ensure you'll never have to worry about money or business decisions again. Isn't that what every parent wants? To know their child will be safe and provided for? But I wasn't the child in this scenario, was I? I was the asset being managed, the problem being solved, the obstacle between Jennifer and whatever financial crisis had driven her to this point. The rain continued to fall against the windows, washing away the last remnants of my illusions about the woman my daughter had become. And somewhere in my kitchen, Tommy worked on his math problems, carrying the weight of family secrets that no 10-year-old should have to bear. The silence that followed Tommy's whispered revelation stretched between Jennifer and me like a taut wire, vibrating with unspoken truths and 43 years of complicated love. I stared at the documents spread across my dining room table, pages that suddenly looked less like estate planning and more like a carefully orchestrated heist. My daughter continued pointing to signature lines with her Mont Blanc pen, the same pen I'd given her for her college graduation, now wielded like a weapon against everything I'd built. Mom, did you hear what I said about the first signature? Jennifer's voice carried that familiar note of barely controlled impatience, the tone she'd perfected during her years climbing corporate ladders. But underneath it, I detected something new, a tremor that spoke of desperation, masked as efficiency. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I found myself studying Jennifer's face the way I used to when she was small and had broken something valuable, searching for traces of the honest child beneath the careful adult facade. Her makeup was flawless as always, but I noticed dark circles that concealer couldn't quite hide, and a tightness around her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. Tommy? I called softly. Come here for a minute, sweetheart. Mom, he's working on his homework, Jennifer interjected quickly. Let's focus on… Tommy. My voice carried the authority of a grandmother who had raised a stubborn daughter and knew how to cut through pretense when necessary. Please come here. He appeared at my side immediately, his gap-toothed smile uncertain but his eyes bright with intelligence that reminded me painfully of my late husband. Richard would have seen through this charade in seconds. He'd always been better at reading people than I was, better at sensing when someone was drowning even when they refused to ask for help. Tommy, when you said your mom is going to take everything from me, what did you mean exactly? I kept my voice gentle, but Jennifer's sharp intake of breath told me she understood the significance of the question. Tommy, go to the kitchen right now, Jennifer commanded, but her son didn't move. He looked between us, his young face creased with a worry that made my heart ache. I heard Mom on the phone last week, he said quietly. She was talking to someone about Grandma's cafes and how much money they make. She said something about liquidating assets? I looked it up online. It means selling things to get money fast. The words hit me like cold water. Liquidating. Not preserving, not protecting, not ensuring my legacy would continue. Selling. Converting everything I'd poured my soul into for 4 decades into cash that would disappear into whatever black hole had swallowed my daughter's financial security. Jennifer's face had gone white beneath her carefully applied foundation. You don't understand what you heard, Tommy. These are complex business matters. I understand that you've been crying every night for 3 months. Tommy shot back with the brutal honesty that only children possess. I understand that you sold your jewelry. I saw you putting it in those little bags. And I understand that you've been stealing money from Grandma because I heard you tell someone on the phone that you'd been borrowing against future distributions. The room fell silent except for the steady drum of rain against the windows and the distant hum of my refrigerator. Jennifer stood frozen, her pen still poised over the documents, her professional mask finally cracking to reveal the frightened woman underneath. I felt my own heart breaking, not just for what she'd done, but for what had driven her to this point. Jennifer, I said softly, look at me. She raised her eyes reluctantly, and I saw my 8-year-old daughter again, the little girl who had hidden her report card when she got her first B+, who had lied about breaking my favorite coffee mug because she couldn't bear my disappointment. The little girl who had carried the weight of being the only thing standing between her widowed mother and complete despair. How long have you been taking money from the accounts? Her composure shattered completely. Tears that had probably been building for months finally broke through, streaming down her cheeks and carrying her mascara with them. 6 months, she whispered. Maybe 7. Just small amounts at first to cover Tommy's school fees when my paycheck was late. I always plan to pay it back. How much? I don't. She was sobbing now, her carefully constructed professional image dissolving into the mess of a woman who had been holding too much for too long. Maybe 40,000. Maybe more. I stopped counting because it hurt too much to know. $40,000. In the grand scheme of Harrison's Corner Cafe's annual revenue, it wasn't catastrophic, but it represented something far more devastating than money. It represented the complete breakdown of trust between us, the crumbling of the relationship I'd thought was the most solid thing in my life. Why didn't you just ask me for help? The question came out more wounded than angry, which seemed to hurt Jennifer more than accusations would have. Because you never ask for help, she exploded, her grief transforming into decades of accumulated resentment. You never needed anyone, never showed weakness, never let anyone see you struggle. Do you have any idea what it's like being the daughter of someone who built an empire from nothing? Everyone expects you to be just as strong, just as capable, just as perfect. Her words cut deep, because they carried the sharp edge of truth. I had prided myself on self-reliance, on showing Jennifer that women could stand on their own and build something meaningful. But somewhere in teaching her to be strong, I had failed to teach her that strength sometimes meant admitting vulnerability. I lost my job in April, she continued, her voice breaking. The marketing firm downsized, and I was part of the redundancy elimination. They gave me 6 months severance, but Tommy's private school costs $12,000 a semester, and the house payment is $3,200 a month, and my car payment, and insurance, and... She trailed off, overwhelmed by the mathematics of her own destruction. Why didn't you tell me? Because I thought I could fix it. I had interviews lined up, leads on consulting contracts. I thought it would just be a temporary setback. But then the interviews didn't pan out, and the consulting work dried up. And suddenly 6 months had passed and I was facing bankruptcy. Tommy moved closer to me, his small hand finding mine. Mom's been applying for jobs every day, he said quietly. Sometimes she applies for like 20 jobs in one day. But nobody wants to hire her because she's overqualified or because they want someone younger. The picture was becoming clearer and more heartbreaking with each revelation. Jennifer raised to be perfect, faced with the imperfection of unemployment in a market that had no use for 51-year-old marketing executives. Jennifer, who had watched me build something from nothing, unable to admit that she was losing everything she'd worked for. The house? I asked. Foreclosure proceedings start next month. Her voice was barely a whisper. I've managed to delay them twice, but the bank won't negotiate anymore. They want the full amount of back payments, $18,000, or they take the house. $18,000, less than what some of my customers spent on their fancy coffee habits in a year. An amount I could have written a check for without even checking my account balance, but she hadn't asked, and I hadn't known to offer. So your solution was to steal my business? The word steal hit her like a physical blow. She flinched and wrapped her arms around herself. I wasn't stealing, I was trying to create a legal framework where I could manage your assets professionally. The management company I mentioned? It's a shell corporation. I would have been the sole operator, taking a management fee that would allow me to pay back what I borrowed and keep the cafes running, without telling me the truth, without burdening you with my failures. The complexity of her deception was almost impressive in its thoroughness. She had researched legal loopholes, created corporate structures, prepared professional-looking documents, all to avoid the simple act of admitting she needed help. It spoke to a kind of desperate intelligence that broke my heart even as it infuriated me. Jennifer, do you understand what those papers would have done? She nodded miserably. They would have transferred operational control to me while leaving you with technical ownership. You would have retained the properties and received monthly payments, but you wouldn't have had any say in business decisions. And if something happened to you? Her silence was answer enough. If Jennifer had died or become incapacitated, control would have passed to her designated successors, probably lawyers who would have liquidated everything to settle her debts. My life's work would have been auctioned off to pay for her mistakes, and I would have been left with nothing but this aging house and whatever dignity I could salvage. Tommy tugged on my sweater again. Grandma, are you going to call the police? The question hung in the air like smoke. Jennifer's eyes went wide with terror, and I realized that beneath all her careful planning and professional presentation, she was terrified of exactly that possibility. She had gambled everything on my love for her, betting that I would sign documents I didn't fully understand rather than risk destroying our family. I should, I said quietly. and watched what little color remained in Jennifer's face drain away completely. What you've done is embezzlement. Fraud. If any of my other employees had taken $40,000 without permission, I would have called the police immediately. But I'm not just an employee, she whispered. I'm your daughter. That makes it worse, not better. The rain outside had intensified, turning the windows into rivers and creating a cocoon of sound that made our small drama feel both intimate and enormous. I thought about the phone calls I would need to make, to my accountant, to my lawyer, to the insurance company. I thought about the headlines in the Portland Business Journal, the gossip that would ripple through the close-knit community of small business owners who had watched me build Harrison's Corner from a single cart to a local institution. But mostly, I thought about the little girl who used to help me count the day's receipts, carefully sorting bills by denomination while I praised her math skills. The teenager who had written her high school senior project about successful women entrepreneurs, using me as her primary example. The young woman who had called me crying with joy when she got her MBA, saying she finally understood how brilliant my business instincts had been. Where had that girl gone? When had she been replaced by this desperate woman who saw me as an obstacle to be overcome, rather than a mother who would have moved mountains to help her? Tommy, go up to my bedroom and get the shoebox from the top shelf of my closet, I said suddenly. Both Jennifer and Tommy stared at me in confusion. The shoebox? Tommy asked. The blue one. Be careful with it. He disappeared upstairs, his footsteps echoing through the house that had sheltered 3 generations of Harrison women and their dreams. Jennifer wiped her eyes with a tissue, smearing her makeup further. Mom, what? Tell me about the first time you stole from me, I interrupted. She looked stricken. I told you, it started in April when… No, the first time. You were 12 years old and you took money from my purse to buy a birthday present for your friend Sarah. Do you remember? Jennifer's face crumpled. You knew? I've always known. You took $6 and you were so worried about getting caught that you confessed before I even asked. You cried for an hour and insisted on doing extra chores to pay it back. I remember, she whispered. What did I tell you then? You said that taking money without asking was wrong, but wanting to be generous to your friends was good. You said the problem wasn't my heart. It was my method. Tommy returned with the shoebox, setting it carefully on the table among the scattered legal documents. I opened it slowly, revealing what I had hidden there for over 4 decades. Photographs, newspaper clippings, and a collection of notebooks with careful handwriting documenting every financial detail of Harrison's Corner's growth. Do you know what these are? I asked, pulling out the oldest notebook. Jennifer shook her head, but her eyes were fixed on the pages covered in my younger self's careful script. This is a record of every mistake I made in the first 5 years of running my own business. Every loan payment I was late on, every supplier I couldn't pay on time, every month when I had to choose between buying inventory and keeping the lights on. I turned pages, revealing columns of numbers that told the story of a desperate young widow trying to build something from nothing. I nearly went bankrupt 3 times in the first 2 years. Tommy leaned against my shoulder, studying the faded photographs of a much smaller Harrison's Corner cafe. You looked really young, Grandma. I was young and scared, and making mistakes every single day. I looked at Jennifer, whose tears had started flowing again. The difference between us isn't that I never struggled. It's that I didn't have a mother with the resources to help me when I did. I pulled out a manila envelope and dumped its contents on the table. Bank statements, loan documents, and correspondence with creditors painted a picture of those early years that I had never shared with anyone. I want you to understand something, Jennifer. I didn't build this business because I was naturally gifted, or because I never made mistakes. I built it because I was too proud to quit and too desperate to fail. Jennifer was reading over the documents with growing amazement. Mom, I had no idea you struggled this much. What? Because I didn't want you to know. I wanted you to believe that success was possible, that hard work and determination could overcome anything. But I think I did you a disservice by hiding the failures along with the successes. The storm outside seemed to be reaching its peak, with wind rattling the windows and rain drumming against the roof with increasing intensity. Inside our small circle of lamplight, surrounded by the evidence of 2 generations of struggle and survival, I felt something shifting in the space between my daughter and me. Jennifer, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. She nodded, clutching a tissue in her trembling hands. If I had known about your job loss, your financial troubles, your fear of losing the house, if I had known all of it from the beginning, what do you think I would have done? She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the notebooks that chronicled my own darkest financial hours. "You would have helped," she said finally. "You would have given me money or a job or something." "I would have given you everything," I said simply. "Every penny I have, every opportunity I could create, every resource at my disposal, because that's what mothers do for their children, especially when they're drowning." The words seemed to break something inside her. She doubled over as if in physical pain, sobbing with the kind of raw grief that comes from finally acknowledging a truth too painful to face. "I was so ashamed," she choked out between sobs. "So ashamed of failing when you never did. But I did fail, sweetheart. I failed every day for years. The only difference is that I failed forward, learning from each mistake instead of being crushed by it." Tommy had been listening to our conversation with the focused attention of a child who understands that something important is happening, even if he doesn't grasp all the details. Now he climbed into the chair next to Jennifer and put his small arms around her shoulders. "Mom, it's okay," he said with the matter-of-fact compassion that children sometimes possess in greater abundance than adults. "Grandma's not going to let them take our house. Are you, Grandma?" I looked at this boy who had somehow become the conscience of our family, who had risked his mother's anger to warn me about her plans, who was now comforting the woman who had put us all in this impossible situation. "No, Tommy, I'm not going to let anyone take your house." Jennifer lifted her head, her face streaked with tears and ruined makeup. "But the money I took will be deducted from your inheritance along with interest," I said firmly. "But we'll work out a repayment plan that doesn't destroy your life, and you'll work for it. Really work, not just sign papers and collect management fees." The relief in her eyes was so intense it was almost painful to witness. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." "Don't thank me yet," I warned, "because this is going to be harder than anything you've ever done. You're going to start at the bottom, and I mean the very bottom. You'll work shifts at the cafes, learn every aspect of the business, prove that you can be trusted with small responsibilities before I give you bigger ones. And if you ever take money without asking again, I will call the police. Family or not." She nodded eagerly, wiping her nose with the back of her hand like the child she had once been. "I'll do anything. I'll work any hours, take any position. And you'll see a counselor," I added. Because stealing from family when you're desperate is one thing, but the elaborate deception you plan tonight suggests problems that go deeper than financial stress. I won't enable your self-destructive tendencies by pretending they don't exist. For a moment, I thought she might argue. Her pride had always been her greatest strength and her most dangerous weakness. But then she looked around the table, at Tommy watching her with hopeful eyes, at the documents that represented her failed attempt to solve her problems through deception, at the evidence of my own struggles that I had finally shared with her, and nodded. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay." The rain was beginning to ease, and through the dining room windows, I could see the first hints of evening light breaking through the clouds. The storm was passing, but I knew the real work was just beginning. Rebuilding trust, restructuring relationships, learning to ask for help and accept imperfection. These were challenges that would require months or years, not a single conversation on a rainy October evening. But for the first time in weeks, I felt something I had almost forgotten: hope. Not the naive hope that pretends problems don't exist, but the mature hope that believes in the possibility of healing even the deepest wounds. "Tommy," I said, "I think it's time for those cinnamon rolls. And Jennifer, you're going to help us make them. It's been too long since we cooked together." As we moved toward the kitchen, Jennifer gathered up the unsigned documents that would have stripped away my life's work. What should I do with these? I took them from her hands and walked to the fireplace, where the flames I had started earlier were still burning steadily. Without ceremony, I fed the papers to the fire, watching them curl and blacken and disappear into smoke. "We're going to start over," I said, watching the last traces of her deception turn to ash. "All of us. And this time, we're going to do it together." Outside, the storm clouds were breaking up, revealing patches of clear sky that promised better weather ahead. Inside, 3 generations of Harrison women began the slow, careful work of rebuilding trust, one honest conversation at a time. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my original Harrison's Corner Cafe at 5:47 a.m., watching my daughter struggle with the temperamental espresso machine that had been giving baristas trouble since 2003. Her manicured hands, now showing the honest calluses of real work, fumbled with the portafilter, and steam hissed angrily when she didn't get the angle quite right. Damn it, Jennifer muttered under her breath, then glanced at me apologetically. Sorry, Mom. This machine has a mind of its own. Language, sweetheart, I said mildly, though I was secretly pleased to hear her curse. For 51 years, Jennifer had maintained perfect composure in public, never allowing anyone to see her frustrated or flustered. The fact that she felt comfortable enough to show her irritation meant we were making progress. Here, let me show you again. I moved beside her, my weathered hands covering hers as we worked the machine together. It's not about force. It's about understanding the rhythm. This old girl has been making coffee longer than you've been alive. She deserves respect, not aggression. The morning light filtered through the cafe's large windows, illuminating dust motes that danced above tables where early customers would soon sit with their laptops and newspapers. In 3 hours, this place would be bustling with the familiar chaos of the breakfast rush, but for now, it belonged just to us, mother and daughter, learning to work together for the first time in decades. Jennifer had been here for 2 months now, working the early shift under my direct supervision. True to my promise, I had started her at the very bottom, cleaning tables, washing dishes, restocking supplies. The first week had been a disaster. She had approached each task with the same intensity she'd once brought to marketing campaigns, trying to optimize and systematize jobs that simply required patience and attention to detail. I can create a more efficient workflow for the morning prep, she had announced after her 3rd day, presenting me with a color-coded chart that looked like it belonged in a corporate boardroom. Jennifer, I had replied gently, sometimes efficiency isn't the point. Sometimes the point is learning to slow down and pay attention to what you're actually doing. That conversation had led to tears, the first of many. Jennifer had spent so many years moving at corporate speed, chasing metrics and deadlines, that she had forgotten how to simply be present in the moment. Watching her gradually learn to find satisfaction in small manual tasks had been like watching a wounded animal learn to trust again. The espresso machine finally cooperated, producing a perfect shot with the thick, golden crema that marked quality coffee. Jennifer's face lit up with genuine pride, an expression I hadn't seen from her since she was a child successfully riding her bicycle without training wheels. I think I'm finally getting it, she said, pulling another shot with more confidence. You're getting more than just the coffee, I observed, wiping down the counter with practiced movements. You're getting yourself back. The past 6 months had been the hardest of both our lives, but they had also been unexpectedly healing. After the night of the storm and the burned contracts, Jennifer had moved into my house temporarily. Officially to save money while she got back on her feet, but really because we both needed the daily practice of rebuilding our relationship. The foreclosure on her house had been stopped with a cashier's check for $18,000. Money I had given her not as a gift, but as an advance against future earnings. Every dollar would be repaid through her work at the cafes, an arrangement that preserved both her dignity and my business principles. Tommy had adjusted to the changes with the resilience that children possess when the adults in their lives finally start telling the truth. His grades had actually improved once his mother stopped pretending everything was fine, and he had thrown himself into his new role as unofficial cafe mascot, charming customers, and helping with simple tasks after school. Grandma says I can learn to make latte art when I'm older, he had told his teacher during show and tell, according to a note I'd received that made me laugh until I cried. But first, I have to master the basics, like making hot chocolate that doesn't burn tongues. The therapy sessions I had insisted upon had been Jennifer's greatest challenge. Dr. Tao, Sarah Chen, a counselor who specialized in family dynamics and financial stress, had guided Jennifer through the painful process of understanding how her perfectionism had become self-destructive. I spent so many years trying to prove I was worthy of being your daughter, Jennifer had confessed to me after a particularly difficult session. I thought that meant never needing help, never showing weakness, never admitting I didn't have all the answers. But sweetheart, I had replied, the thing that would make me proudest is knowing you felt safe enough to be imperfect with me. That conversation had taken place in this same kitchen, late one evening after we'd closed. Jennifer had been practicing with the espresso machine, not because she needed to, but because the repetitive motion seemed to calm her anxiety. It was one of many small breakthroughs that had slowly rebuilt the foundation of trust between us. Now, watching her prepare for another day of honest work, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The simple pleasure of spending time with my daughter without hidden agendas or unspoken tensions. She was still learning, still making mistakes, but she was learning from them instead of being crushed by them. The bell above the front door chimed, and Maria entered with her usual cheerful energy. Buenos dias, Dot. Buenos dias, Jennifer. How are my favorite early birds this morning? Good morning, Maria, Jennifer replied, her Spanish pronunciation much improved from 2 months of daily interaction with our primarily Latina kitchen staff. I finally conquered the espresso machine. Excelente! Soon you'll be ready to work the register during breakfast rush. I watched Jennifer's face carefully. 2 months ago, the suggestion that she handle the register, dealing directly with impatient customers demanding complex orders, would have sent her into a spiral of anxiety about performance and perfection. Today, she simply nodded and smiled. I think I'm ready, she said, and I believed her. The breakfast rush began at 7:30 a.m. sharp as it had every weekday for over 20 years. I watched Jennifer navigate her first morning behind the register with the careful attention of a flight instructor monitoring a student pilot's first solo flight. She fumbled occasionally, entering the wrong modifier for a drink order, forgetting to charge for extra shots. But she recovered quickly and maintained the warm, professional demeanor that made customers feel welcomed rather than processed. At 9:15, during the brief lull between morning coffee and the lunch prep, Tommy arrived with his backpack and homework folder. Jennifer's custody arrangement with her ex-husband had been modified to accommodate her new work schedule, and Tommy now spent several afternoons each week at the cafe, doing homework at the corner table I had designated as his personal study space. Mom, Mrs. Peterson wants to know if you can help with the school fundraiser, Tommy announced, pulling worksheets from his folder. They need someone who knows about business stuff. 6 months ago, Jennifer would have immediately said yes, then spent weeks obsessing over creating the perfect fundraising strategy that would impress the other parents. Today, she looked at her schedule thoughtfully. I'm working double shifts this week to cover Maria's vacation, she said. But maybe Grandma and I could work together on it? She has more experience with community fundraising than I do anyway. The casual way she deferred to my expertise, without defensiveness or wounded pride, marked another milestone in her recovery. Jennifer was learning to collaborate instead of compete, to see asking for help as a sign of wisdom rather than weakness. I'd love to help, I said. Mrs. Peterson and I go way back. I helped with fundraisers when you were in elementary school, remember? Tommy grinned. Mom, did you know Grandma once organized a bake sale that raised $3,000 for new playground equipment? I didn't know that, Jennifer said, looking at me with genuine curiosity. How did you manage that? As I told the story of the legendary 1995 bake sale, involving 27 volunteer families, a complex logistics system, and my famous cinnamon rolls, I watched Jennifer listen with the kind of engaged attention she had rarely shown in her adult life. She was learning to be genuinely interested in other people's experiences instead of constantly measuring herself against their achievements. The lunch rush tested her newfound skills more severely. Orders became more complex, customers more demanding, and the pace relentless. I watched her struggle with a particularly difficult patron, a businessman who changed his sandwich order 3 times, complained about the wait, and demanded a discount for his inconvenience. 6 months ago, Jennifer would have either exploded at his rudeness or collapsed into self-doubt about her competence. Today, she maintained her composure while he ranted, then calmly offered solutions until he was satisfied. When he finally left, she looked at me with raised eyebrows. Are all customers like that, or am I just lucky? About 1 in 50, I replied. The trick is not taking it personally. He's probably having a terrible day, and you're just the convenient target. I used to be that customer sometimes, she admitted quietly. When work was stressful, I'd take it out on service workers who were just trying to do their jobs. I never realized how hard it is to stay professional when someone's being unreasonable. These moments of self-awareness had become more frequent as Jennifer gained experience on the other side of the service counter. Working with her hands, dealing directly with customers, earning money through physical labor, all of it was teaching her lessons that no amount of corporate training could have provided. At 2:30 p.m. during the afternoon lull, Jennifer sat across from me at Tommy's homework table, reviewing the weekly financial reports that had become part of her rehabilitation process. She was learning every aspect of cafe operations from the ground up, understanding not just how to make drinks but how ingredients were sourced, how labor costs were managed, how seasonal fluctuations affected profitability. The Selwood location is underperforming again, she noted, studying the spreadsheet with the analytical skills that had once made her successful in marketing. Same pattern as last quarter. Strong mornings, weak afternoons. What do you think might be causing that? She considered the question thoughtfully, an approach that contrasted sharply with the quick, confident answers she used to provide. The afternoon demographic is probably different from the morning commuters. Maybe we need different offerings. Afternoon pastries, light lunch options, something that appeals to families with kids or people working from home. Good analysis. What would you recommend? 6 months ago, I would have recommended a complete menu overhaul and a targeted marketing campaign, she said with a rueful smile. But now I think I'd start by spending some time actually working at that location, talking to customers, understanding what they need that we're not providing. I felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with her intelligence, which had never been in question, and everything to do with her newfound wisdom. Jennifer was learning to gather information before making decisions, to test assumptions rather than act on them blindly. That sounds like an excellent plan, I said. When do you think you'll be ready for that kind of responsibility? She was quiet for a long moment, watching Tommy work on his math problems with focused concentration. I want to finish 6 months here first, she said finally. I want to be really solid with all the basic operations before I start trying to solve bigger problems. And I want to make sure Tommy's completely settled in his new routine. The old Jennifer would have been champing at the bit for more responsibility, more challenge, more opportunity to prove herself. This Jennifer understood that mastery takes time, that rushing toward the next goal often means missing the lessons of the current one. At 4:00 p.m., as we prepared to close for the afternoon transition to evening shift, Maria approached with an envelope marked personal and confidential. This came for Jennifer, she said. Looks official. Jennifer's face went pale as she recognized the return address, her old marketing firm. For a moment, the careful composure she had built over 6 months threatened to crack, and I saw the shadow of the desperate woman who had tried to steal my business pass across her features. It's probably just paperwork, I said gently. Final tax documents or benefits information. She opened the envelope with trembling hands, then stared at the contents in amazement. It's a job offer, she said slowly. Senior marketing director at a new agency. They say several of my former clients specifically requested me, and they're willing to match my old salary plus benefits. The silence that followed was charged with possibility and fear in equal measure. This was the moment we had both known would come eventually, the test of whether the changes in Jennifer's life were real, or simply a response to desperate circumstances. What are you going to tell them? I asked carefully. Jennifer read through the offer letter twice, her expression unreadable. Then she folded it neatly and placed it in her purse. I'm going to tell them thank you for thinking of me, but I already have a job. The relief I felt was immediately followed by concern. Jennifer, you don't have to turn down a good opportunity because of what? Because I'm finally learning to do work that matters? Because I'm building a relationship with my son that isn't based on buying him things I can't afford? Because I'm discovering that my mother is actually someone I want to spend time with? She stood up and began wiping down tables with the methodical care she had learned over the past months. Mom, for 25 years, I chased jobs that paid well but left me feeling empty. I worked for companies that valued profit over people, and I convinced myself that was just how the business world worked. But watching you run these cafes, seeing how you treat your employees and customers, learning to find satisfaction in simple, honest work, it's changed how I think about success. Tommy looked up from his math homework. Does this mean we're staying with Grandma? If she'll have us, Jennifer said, meeting my eyes with a vulnerability that reminded me of the little girl who used to ask permission for everything. For as long as you want, I replied, meaning it completely. As the afternoon sun slanted through the cafe windows, painting everything in warm, golden light, I felt the weight of the past 6 months settling into something that felt like wisdom. Jennifer was right. She had learned to do work that mattered. But more than that, we had both learned that the most important work isn't always the most lucrative or prestigious. Sometimes the most important work is the patient, daily practice of rebuilding trust, one honest conversation at a time. That evening, after Tommy had finished his homework and Jennifer had completed the closing procedures, we sat together in the booth that had become our unofficial family meeting place. The cafe was quiet except for the gentle hum of refrigeration units and the distant sound of traffic on Burnside Street. I've been thinking about expansion, I said, pulling out a notebook filled with preliminary sketches and financial projections. Jennifer raised her eyebrows. More locations? Actually, I was thinking about diversification. Coffee roasting, maybe some wholesale accounts. There are a lot of small businesses in Portland that might want to serve Harrison's Corner coffee, but can't afford a full cafe setup. That's actually brilliant, Jennifer said, studying my rough business plan with growing excitement. The wholesale margins would be higher than retail, and it would leverage our existing supply relationships. We could start with food carts and small restaurants, build up volume gradually. I was hoping you might be interested in heading up that division, I said casually. Once you're ready, maybe in another year or so. Her face lit up with the kind of genuine enthusiasm I hadn't seen from her in years. I would love that. I mean, if you think I'm qualified... Jennifer, I interrupted gently. 6 months ago, you were qualified to run a marketing department. Now you're becoming qualified to run a business. There's a difference. She nodded, understanding immediately what I meant. The difference is knowing how the work actually gets done, not just how to analyze it from a distance. Exactly. As we locked up the cafe and walked to our cars in the gentle evening air, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete contentment with the present moment. Not satisfaction with past achievements or anticipation of future goals, but simple pleasure in what was happening right now. My daughter beside me, my grandson chattering about his day, my business thriving through honest work and fair treatment of everyone involved. Tommy fell asleep during the short drive home, and Jennifer carried him upstairs while I made tea for the two of us. When she returned to the kitchen, she looked more peaceful than I had ever seen her as an adult. "Mom," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something." My stomach tightened slightly. After 6 months of rebuilding trust, I still felt a flutter of anxiety whenever conversations began with those particular words. "I understand now why you built the business the way you did," she continued. "I used to think you were being inefficient, keeping employees longer than you needed to, giving customers extra attention that didn't immediately translate to profit, spending money on quality ingredients when cheaper ones would have worked just as well." She sat across from me at the kitchen table where we had shared so many difficult conversations over the past months. "But now I realize you weren't just building a business. You were building a community. The cafes aren't just places to buy coffee. They're places where people feel welcomed and valued. That's why customers keep coming back, why employees stay for years, why other business owners respect you even when you're technically their competition." It wasn't a conscious strategy, I admitted. I just treated people the way I wanted to be treated. But that's exactly what I mean. You built something sustainable because you built it on relationships instead of just transactions. And relationships take time and patience and genuine care. She reached across the table and took my hand, something she hadn't done since she was a child. "I'm sorry it took me so long to understand, and I'm sorry I almost destroyed what you spent 40 years building. You didn't destroy anything, sweetheart. You just got lost for a while. But you found your way back." The rain had started again, a gentle pattering against the windows that reminded me of the storm 6 months earlier when our world had nearly collapsed. But this rain felt different, cleansing rather than threatening, promising growth rather than destruction. "What do you think Tommy will remember about this year?" Jennifer asked, watching the water create abstract patterns on the glass. I considered the question carefully. "I think he'll remember the year his mom learned to be brave enough to ask for help, and the year his grandmother learned that the best inheritance isn't money or property, but the knowledge that love doesn't depend on perfection." "Do you really believe that, after everything I did?" "Jennifer, 6 months ago, you were so afraid of disappointing me that you nearly destroyed both our lives. Tonight, you turned down a prestigious job offer because you wanted to keep working in a coffee shop. If that isn't growth, I don't know what is." She smiled, the first completely unguarded expression I had seen from her in decades. "I do love working in the coffee shop. I never thought I'd say that, but I really do. There's something satisfying about making things with your hands, about seeing immediate results from your effort." "That's because it's real work," I said. "Work that connects you to other people instead of isolating you from them." As the evening deepened and the rain continued its gentle rhythm, we sat together in comfortable silence, each lost in our own thoughts about the long journey that had brought us to this moment. I thought about the scared young widow who had scraped together $47 to buy a coffee cart, never imagining that decision would eventually lead to 7 successful businesses and the chance to teach her daughter the value of honest labor. Jennifer was probably thinking about the desperate woman who had tried to steal those businesses, never imagining that getting caught would be the best thing that ever happened to her relationship with her family. Tommy slept peacefully upstairs, dreaming whatever dreams occupy the minds of 10-year-olds who have learned that adults sometimes make mistakes, but that love can survive even the biggest ones. At 10:30 p.m., as we prepared for bed, Jennifer paused at the bottom of the stairs. "Mom, I want you to know something. If I could go back and change what happened, the stealing, the lies, the contracts, I'm not sure I would." I looked at her in surprise. "Really? Really? Because all of that led to this, to us actually knowing each other, to me understanding what you built and why it matters, To Tommy, seeing both of us as real people instead of perfect figures who never struggle. She smiled. Sometimes the worst mistakes lead to the best discoveries. That's very wise, sweetheart. I learned it from my mother. She taught me that falling down isn't failing. It's just the first step in getting back up. As I turned off the lights and climbed the stairs to my bedroom, I reflected on the truth of Jennifer's words. The past 6 months had indeed been born from our worst moments. Her desperate dishonesty, my shocked betrayal, the shattering of illusions we had both clung to for too long. But from those ashes had grown something neither of us could have planned or anticipated. A genuine partnership based on mutual respect rather than obligation. I thought about Richard, my husband who had died too young to see his daughter grow up, and wondered what he would make of the women we had become. I thought he would be proud of Jennifer's courage in admitting her mistakes and doing the hard work of earning redemption. I thought he would be proud of my decision to choose love over justice, understanding over punishment. Most of all, I thought he would be proud that we had finally learned to be honest with each other about our fears, our failures, and our hopes for the future. The next morning would bring another day of working together, learning together, building something sustainable on the foundation of trust we had so carefully reconstructed. There would be challenges ahead. There always were in business and in family life, but for the first time in decades, I felt confident that we could face those challenges together, drawing strength from each other instead of trying to prove we didn't need help. The rain had stopped, and through my bedroom window, I could see the first stars appearing between the breaking clouds. Portland stretched out below, a city full of dreamers and entrepreneurs, artists and coffee lovers, people who believed that small actions could create meaningful change. Tomorrow, Jennifer and I would serve some of those people, one carefully crafted cup of coffee at a time. We would continue the work of building community, nurturing relationships, and proving that business can be both profitable and humane when it's conducted with genuine care for everyone involved. But tonight, I fell asleep to the sound of my daughter's voice carrying softly down the hall as she read Tommy a bedtime story. The same voice that had once tried to deceive me, now offering comfort and security to the next generation of our family. Some endings, I realized, are actually beginnings in disguise. And some families discover their greatest strength not in their perfection, but in their willingness to forgive, to learn, and to start over with whatever love they have left. In my dreams, I saw Harrison's Corner Cafe as it would be in years to come, busier, expanded, but still maintaining the warmth and authenticity that made it a gathering place for people who believed in the simple magic of sharing good coffee and honest conversation. And in every version of that future, Jennifer was there beside me, no longer trying to prove herself worthy of love, but simply accepting that she had always been worthy, mistakes and all. The weight of trust, I had learned, was not a burden to be carried alone, but a foundation to be built together, one honest moment at a time. During a family meeting, my daughter brought contracts saying they were inventory papers. I only realized the trap when my grandson whispered, "Grandma, she's going to take everything from you and leave you with just an old house." I shuddered.